This is Zichru Simanim Gemara in Zevachim Daf Dalit, and Dalit is always going to be a deles, a door, and therefore, of course, in our picture over here, we see two doors. Now, Daf Dalit is a little bit challenging, as it's a lot of mekayres, a lot of psukim. So, how are we going to remember the psukim? So, we're going to have two different sets of doors over here. One set of doors is going to be your Shinoi Kodesh, which is when you shech the carbon for the wrong carbon, achatas l'shem ayla, etc. The second door is going to be a shinei bailim, that you shechted for the wrong owner. And the daf discusses, number one, all the mekayrais vim zevach shlam karbanai, which teaches us zvicha l'shem shlamim, that it has to be lishma, and you should not have a shinoi kodesh. Number two is the mekayrais, the sources, that it has to be l'shem bailim, ubasar zevach toida shlamim. And then number three, we see a person that he's reading a letter, a pasuk, nedarta nidava. Why does the pasuk nedarta nidava? And he's very excited. Why is he excited? Because he learns that even though it was shechted for the wrong reason, but it still could be brought on the mizbeach, even though it was shaloi lishma. So, of course, is what our entire Masechta so far has been talking about. Kol hazvachos shenizbechu shaloi lishman, but lamaisa it is still kosher. It can be brought on the mizbeach. So, point number one of our daf dalit, our door, is going to be our shinoi kodesh door. The source is that it has to be lishma and should not be a shinoi kodesh. Point number two is going to be the source is that it has to be for the right bailim, shinoi bailim. And number three is that if it was shaloi lishma, lamaisa keshenadarta nedava, it's still be brought as a nedava, it's still brought on the mizbeach. And now we dive a little bit further into our 3 points. Point number one, where the sources was our daf dalit, our door, that had to do with shinei kodesh l'shema. Says the Gemara, how do we know din zvicha l'shema? We quote a pasuk of Zevach shlamim karbanai. Zevach teaches shete zvicha l'shem shlamim. The Gemara brings sukkim about the other avodas. There's 4 critical avodas. Of course, shchita, kabbalah, haylacha, and zrika. So the pasuk brings the Gemara reads down sukkim regarding that the kabbalah, the zrika, has to also be lishma. The Gemara says, what about haylacha? What does that have to be? And then we have another pasuk. Why she'yav shelevatala? The Gemara proves that each avodah cannot avoid. Whereas halacha you could. Halacha, if you shecht right near the mizbeach, you don't have to halacha. So ask the Gemara, how do you know that halacha also has to be lishma? Says the Gemara, v'izkor as the kol mizbeach, and therefore we learn out from the hikrivu, the second pasuk, that even the halacha has to be lishma, l'shem karban, and you cannot have a shinei kodesh. Door number 2 in our delas and our daf dalit is that it has to be the shem bailim, and you cannot have a shinoi bailim. So we had all the psukim for shinoi kodesh. Says the Gemara, what about shinoi bailim? How do we know it has to be for the right owner? Ubasar zevach toidav shlamav, says the Gemara, which teaches us that the shechita has to be the shem toida, and we already know that. We already know it has to be for the right carbon. We already know you can't have a shinoi kodesh. So for the pasuk teaches us shinoi bailim. What about other avodas? Again, the 4 critical avodas, says the Gemara. Different reasons we can learn out from shinoi kodesh. It says the Gemara, klal upradu klal. Just as shchita is an avodah that requires lishma, all avodas require lishma. Shinoi kodesh, shinoi bailim, we're by shlamim, and then we extend it of zoyster asolim mincha chatzal hashem lemun zevachu shlamim. The pasuk puts all the karbanas together. Kishan akasav lishlamim. They're all equated to the shlamim, just like a shlamim needs lishma by both shinoi kodesh, and now we're learning shinoi bailim. Again, those 2 doors that daf dalit are 2 doors, shinoi kodesh and shinoi bailim. We learn it out too, shinoi bailim as well. And point number 3 is what's the source that if lamaisa shloi lishma doesn't passel up the carbon? Why is it not completely possible? Why does the pasuk says neder and nedava? Which one is it? Says the Gemara, if you did it right, it's a neder, and if not, nedava yehei should be a nedava, which means it still remains a valid carbon and can still be brought onto the mizbeach. So daf dalit in Zevachim, we have dalit being a door. We have our 2 doors. We have our shinoi kodesh door. The source is that you have to bring it for the right reason, and the dalit avodas, how we learn how those And then we have the Shini Bailim door, and the hekish between Shlamim and other Karbanis. It has to both be Lishma, both for Shini Kodesh and Shini Bailim. And finally, the halacha that if it was not done Lishma, Lamaisa, Maisim Sech Tishmark, Vizizike Asher Nedarta, Nidava. If it's not a neder, it's a nidava. It's going to be brought on the Mizbeach. Gemara and Zvachim, Dalid, your doors, Shini Kodesh, Shini Bailim, and the appropriate Mekayris.